made this film because our mental health system is just so messed up in the United States, and it just damages so many people so profoundly that when I started hearing about places in the world that did a better job than our mental health system in the United States, I wanted to go and visit them myself. And I thought, what better way to bring back what I found than by capturing it somehow on film, by making a documentary out of it. And really the place that was most important for me to visit in the world was the Open Dialogue Project in Western Lapland. Because on paper, and no one was denying this, on paper they were getting the best results in the world for first break psychosis. It was just 100 kilometers south of the Arctic Circle, so that's like 60 miles south of the Arctic Circle. And I was there in June, and June is right around the solstice, meaning that there's light all the time. When I got there, I thought, what a novelty, ooh, light all the time, you know, it doesn't get dark at night. The first night I was there, I stayed up until 1:30 in the morning, and it looked outside like it was 1:30 in the afternoon, and I was like, this is weird. And it took me about 3 or 4 days before I got used to going to bed by light. I felt like I was like 6 years old again and being sent to bed at like 7 o'clock at night to, you know, get to bed early. And so it was weird, and it also made me wonder, is like, does this affect the local people? I mean, is this part of why people have some sleep problems, which maybe lead to this thing called psychosis? And I asked a lot of therapists that, and they're all like, no. That we all get used to it. We've lived this way our whole lives. You know, in the summer it's light all the time, in the winter it's dark all the time. And this is just normal for us. Another thing that was bizarre is just like, even going into the supermarket, it was like, oh, like the food was strange. It's like, okay, at first I'm looking at, you know, ground beef, like hamburger meat, and then pork and chicken, and then there's reindeer, and then there's moose. And I'm like, this is definitely different. We're not in New York anymore. And this wasn't like a novelty item, you know, like, ooh, you can buy bison or buy ostrich. No, this is really like real local food that people actually eat, and it's like caught or hunted or whatever it is locally. Another thing is the language. I have a kind of a fascination with languages, and before I was in Finland, I spent 2 weeks in Sweden filming there, and I was working really hard to learn as much Swedish as I could. Well, I put my same effort into learning Finnish and realized Finnish is not Swedish. Swedish is basically like almost next to English by comparison. Finnish is way off the charts. And what's really interesting is in the far north of Finland, it borders, in the town I was in Tornio, it bordered right on a town in northern Sweden called Haparanda, and it's just across a river, the River Tornio. So I would walk over to Sweden sometimes to take a break from what I was doing in Tornio, and it was such a relief to go to Sweden, because what I found when I got over to Sweden is that I could actually read things. I would be reading the Swedish and I would like, it makes sense, I could understand it. Swedish is sort of like a little bit more extreme than German. Finnish is like, you know, it's connected to Estonian and Hungarian, and these are languages that have basically no cognates with English. One thing that Finnish people told me, Finnish people themselves told me, is that Finnish people have a reputation for being kind of expressionless. They don't talk a lot. There were jokes that people told me that are part of the culture about how people like really don't talk much at all. And I was like, this is going to be very difficult to make a documentary that's a very talky kind of talking head documentary when the culture is basically that people don't talk too much. And I was like, oh God, I hope it works. I hope people actually will even talk at all, let alone talk in a second language for them, and in a language that's so extremely different from Finnish. I actually found people to be more talky than their reputation would lead one to believe. And sometimes, what I also did find is, yes, a lot of times people did very much keep a straight face during a lot of the interviews. It was a lot, you know, kind of straight and square. But when they did have expressions, it was like these beautiful moments of expression would just come bursting out. And it was like, oh my God, I knew those moments were moments that just had to make it into the film.
But yeah, I'm very pleased that I stayed.
What was difficult the first year?
You know, that dialogue.
One of the main things that blew me away about the open dialogue approach was just the principles upon which their program was based. And although some of the things were definitely geared toward a small, partially rural population in the far north of Finland, some of their principles I felt could totally just as well apply to doing therapy on a hugely large scale in New York City. The first thing, very simply, is just meet people immediately. When they're having a crisis, don't put them through a whole waiting list. Don't send them to an emergency room to wait for days. Don't give them a referral and have them wait for 2 weeks before they meet with someone. Just meet with someone immediately. Another thing is, don't stick them in the hospital. Keep people away from the hospital. I think that's just perfect and brilliant and healthy. It's like this idea of mental hospitals where people get taken out of their life and locked away. It's like, I think that's horrible, and it so hurts people. I've seen it hurt so many people in my professional practice. Another thing, keep them away from the neuroleptic drugs, if at all possible. It's like, these drugs, they don't really help that much. Okay, yeah, for some people they can help stabilize symptoms, but at what cost? And what about all the people where they don't even help stabilize the symptoms? So I love the idea of helping people work through their problems, helping them work out whatever is emotionally is causing their problems or whatever interactionally is causing their problems, and help them get a handle on it and learn that they can solve their problems from within, not by taking a pill. One thing that hit me very personally is seeing how the therapists there work in teams. I worked alone. I always worked alone. And what's so sad is that I loved working alone because I really didn't have any colleagues that I felt so safe working with. I felt the only way I could possibly do good work in New York City was by working alone, by getting away from working in teams. So if I really had the chance to have colleagues who really were on board with what I was doing, and I was on board with what they were doing, and we had really common ideas about healing, and common ideas about this thing called psychosis, and common ideas about helping people, I think it would be fantastic to work in teams. And I think that's probably why so many of the open dialogue therapists enjoyed their work. And I think also that clients, I don't think I know it, because I talked to so many clients when I was there in Northern Finland. And what they said is that they found it very normal that there would be 2 therapists there at the same time, or 3 therapists. They liked it that the therapists talked back and forth with each other and were very open about what they were thinking. And then it gave a really safe and comfortable window for the clients to look into what the therapists were thinking without the pressure of the therapist saying it directly to the client. Because I think that could be kind of alienating and off-putting. Instead, when the therapists were talking about it with each other, there was a kind of buffer there. And so I think it made it more comfortable and more gentle for the therapist to do their work. And it also made it more comfortable, and I hate to use the word, but that's what I really felt. I think it made it easier for the clients to recover. This film's big weakness, as I see it, is that I didn't interview any clients on camera. And so, basically, to make sense of this film, it's almost like you gotta trust me and trust clinicians. And I just sort of, as just a person out in the world, I just sort of have a natural skepticism about trusting therapists. And I much prefer to actually hear what's being said from the client's point of view, from these people labeled with psychosis, or the people who have gotten well from this thing called psychosis. And it really did frustrate me that I couldn't interview clients. But I should be more careful, actually. I should be careful with what I say. Because actually I interviewed a lot of clients, I just didn't interview them on camera. And so basically my interviews with clients were informal. It was just talking to people. And basically everything I heard confirmed what the clinicians were saying. And that was very, very, very important to me, because if the clients had actually been contradicting what the therapists had been saying, there's no way I could have made a movie about open dialogue. I'm not a big proponent of family therapy. It's like, too often, I think family therapy can be used to bully children, or even adult children in families, into conforming, into giving up symptoms, into just behaving better. And obviously this happens if the therapist sides with the parents, because the parents have the power in the system. And they can put so much pressure on the younger person to change and conform. And heaven forbid the child is rebelling for perfectly healthy reasons, which, in my observation, generally tends to be the case. When kids are rebelling, it's like often the parents are doing some pretty screwed up stuff. So if the therapists in family therapy are siding with the parents, it's a bad thing, that's my opinion. But one thing that the open dialogue approach says is they keep all family members on equal footing. They weigh everybody's voice equally, and they give everyone an equal role. Well, to be honest, for me, that wasn't good enough either, because if you're giving everyone an equal role in the therapy and everyone has equal power, then in a way that doesn't acknowledge that once the people leave and they go back home, the parents actually have more power. So I think even if you give everyone equal footing, you can still put a massive amount of pressure on a younger person to conform. So when I got to Northern Finland, I asked a lot of clinicians what they thought of this, and I asked clients too. And what was very interesting is most said on camera that it was all about equal footing. Everyone was treated in an equal way. But when I started to get to know people better, and I started to get to know the clinicians better, and I would go out and have dinner with them and talk with them off camera and just hang out with them, even go out back and have a cigarette, what I heard is that deep down, they don't treat families all equally. What I found is that they treat everybody respectfully, and I have no problem with treating everyone respectfully, even abusive parents, overtly, loudly abusive parents. They treat them respectfully, and because they're trying to help everybody, and I have no problem with that. But when it comes to family therapy, what I found is that they side with the children more. And when I sat in on therapy sessions, I felt it also. So it was actually pretty funny to me when I got asked if I wanted to do this interview for the local paper, and I was like, ooh, this could be really good for my movie also, because since I wasn't interviewing clients, I felt the movie was at risk of becoming kind of boring and just becoming sort of like a nuts and bolts academic film, and I didn't want it to become that. So when I had the opportunity to be interviewed myself by this local newspaper, I thought, ooh, this could spice it up a little bit. And so I did the interview. It was fun. It was in some ways like a nuts and bolts kind of interview. But what happened was it came out in the newspaper. And scarily enough to me, I was still filming while this was going on, and I was like, well, I hope I didn't say anything that really pissed off the local clinicians, because I was talking all about my experience with their program, and I didn't really know. So I went to a few of the ones that I trusted the most, and I said, did you read the article? And they had all read it. They read the article in the paper. And I was like, was it okay? And they're like, it was fine, it was fine. And some of them like translated parts of it, but it was a long article and we didn't have a huge amount of time to sit there and go through word by word. But basically I gathered that it was an okay article. But what was really fun after that was that, I hate to use the word, but it's the truth, I became kind of locally famous. I remember I was going to mail some of the tapes I had, the movie tapes, back to England, where I had a friend who was holding them for me. And I was in line at the post office, and the woman at the post office looks at me and she goes, I know you. You're from the newspaper. You're the therapist from New York. You're the documentary filmmaker. And I was like,